Before we jump into the podcast today, I just want to let you know that this podcast today is brought to you by our friends at Creating a Masterpiece. Creating a Masterpiece is an amazing resource for your kids to help awaken and inspire and maybe even feed some of their creative hunger that they have. The people at Creating a Masterpiece do a fantastic job of walking you through different art projects. It's an art project online that mom and dad don't have to necessarily sit down and learn everything ahead of time. They just walk you through different things, whether it's a drawing project, a painting project, or a sculpting project. We really want to encourage you to go to their website and find out more. Try a free sample project and see what it really can do to inspire and awaken creativity, especially the picture smarts in your kids. Just go to creatingamasterpiece.com. Now let's turn to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
Dr. Kathy, in a recent interview with the New York Times, author Jonathan Haidt, he recently wrote the book Anxious Generation. He said, quote, "In the Monitoring Future study, since the 1970s, we've asked high school seniors the question, 'My life feels useless. Do you agree or disagree with that on a 5-point scale?'" End quote. Haidt notes that until 2010, around 9% would say yes. And then all of a sudden in 2012, it really doubled within 5 or 10 years. He says that kids are immersed in stories that have a moral order to them, which is what we were immersed in when we were kids. All the stories had some kind of moral. Even in shows like I Dream of Jeannie, there was really a moral framework that was put in by the adults who made that show. But what kids see on TikTok and Instagram are really not stories at all. They're amoral or immoral sometimes. A lot of them are really actually horrible things. Kids end up watching really violent videos on X. There's really no filter for them. Especially boys are seeing a lot of videos of people getting into accidents or different violent things. And Haidt notes this in his book and also in a lot of them in a number of interviews that he's done since. Haidt says that kids really need moral formation. Kids need structure. They need a shared moral framework. And morality, he says, works like language. You can't have your own language and you can't have your own morality. It only works as a shared system and order inside of culture. And once kids move on to social media, it just makes really a million little fragments of nonsense, Haidt says. He really goes on to say that there is no moral order inside of social media, which is the world that a lot of our kids are living in. And Dr. Kathy, I remember John Stone Street and a lot of the teachers at Summit Ministries a couple of years ago went on this really attack of kind of culture and what they were seeing in media at the time. They called it the Seinfeld generation. Seinfeld is, I don't know if you remember, but it's often was termed the show about nothing. Episodes don't really link together and there's no ongoing narrative. It's just friends living in New York City. Why do kids need an ongoing framework or narrative, especially as they build their understanding and their calling in the world?
This is so fascinating. By the way, I have not thought of I Dream of Jeannie in forever.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
you're
I mean,
welcome.
seriously,
Yeah.
what a picture in my mind. And yet I can see that there was a moral framework to that. They only went so far. Very,
Mhm.
very interesting. Why do kids need this ongoing narrative? Because that is how the world works, right? There is morality, or there should be. There are people who do good things, wrong things. How does that help us understand the calling in the world? We're supposed to be making a difference. We're supposed to be relating to people in such a way that they're better for knowing us. And so if we just have, I like that phrase, a million little fragments of nonsense, like that is a description of social media that I've never heard before that really fits pretty well. Oh my goodness. And if that's all our young people know, then they're not going to expect anything else. They're not going to expect common sense. They're not going to expect sense. And they're not going to expect something that goes deep. But we're supposed to go deep. We're supposed to care deeply about and be passionate about significant things, including people. And we're not going to get that if we just are surrounded by a million little fragments of nothing.
You know, Dr. Kathy, I do think that that is the nature of the world today. There is a ton of fragments of nothing, but the other side of this is that there is no accountability to a larger narrative or a larger story, right? And so it's natural then for our kids to think that they can do these other things. I think even the world thinks that they can do these other things, like be in a be a man and in a woman's body, or there's a number of other issues that we kind of end up running into that we don't have to actually fall in line with anything. It's the postmodern mood that we could call it, as John Stone Street likes to call it, at the breakpoint, that there is this cultural mood that we end up living inside of that doesn't have to have any meta narrative, any greater overarching story. And our kids are oftentimes conditioned or prepared for that. I want to ask you, if we were going to maybe pull our kids back into reality, are there questions that you would ask a kid to pull them out of maybe this idea of they're living in a fragmented world? How do we pull our kids back into a world that has a meta narrative, that has a greater story, that has a sense of moral order and structure? Because the world does, right? The reality is there's gravity, right? And we could try to live in the world as if there is not gravity, but we know that that's really futile. We're going to have a hard time in life if we try to live in that world. That's the same with morals and order. And our kids are being conditioned to think that there isn't that. How do we pull them back? Are there a series of questions or some frameworks that as parents we can kind of ask our kids or engage them to pull them back into the real world?
I think we need to be bold and ask questions about right and wrong. I think we need to earn the right to ask our kids, why did you just do that? Or why didn't you do that? Now, often kids don't know. Let's be honest there's denial. There's also impulse, and they're just acting in some type of repetitive routine that has worked for them. Yet we ask the question, why are you choosing to spend your money the way you are? Why are you choosing to watch shows like that? Why is that game appealing to you? And get them to begin to think that there should be a why behind every what. There's always a reason. Who are you trying to impress? What are you avoiding by doing that? Why is that compelling to you? So I think we need to ask those kinds of questions at the same time that we explain what motivates us to do what we do.
Dr. Kathy, that is the reality. I think that most of our kids are going to maybe exercise their freedom or their understanding of the world from social media. But there's a greater story that's really, I would say, kind of like a family story. I think the family story is really the first and probably most powerful story that we introduce our kids to. So with that, what you said was really helpful to think through how we kind of engage that. Is there a way that you'd encourage us to engage even our family story with our kids? What would be some simple ways to connect our kids to the larger meta narrative or larger story, the larger narrative of what's happening in our family? That might be a great first step. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great first step. I think the family story is premier from birth to death. Family is supposed to be important, and the family story should be intriguing. When kids have to, choose a hero to write a story about, I would hope that they would look within their family. When when the assignment is, talk to a person 20 years older than you or more to talk about life, I would hope that they would think of a relative or maybe a neighbor or a Sunday school teacher. All of that is good, but the family matters. So in our family, we make a big point of making sure that the youngest children know who the older people are. I've told this story before, but I think it's interesting that when my oldest niece has 3 children, and when her firstborn was with us for his first Christmas, he had not met me before. I am his grandfather's sister. So my brother Dave is the father of this little boy's mom. So my brother Dave is the grandfather. And JD was looking at me like, who are you? And so I am the sister, just like he has a little sister. And we made sure to explain that. And by the way, another thing that's important in the family, Wayne, I didn't force him to love me. He had never met me before. I have loved him since he was conceived. And I've loved him from afar, and I've prayed for him on a regular basis. And I've asked his parents, how's JD and how may I pray for him? He didn't know me from a hole in the wall. So I had to let him spend time with me to see that I too was one of those who would love him forever. I think that's super significant and part of the family. And to ask him questions and to let him ask me questions. That's an example. His mom, Betsy, my niece, has a wall of pictures in her home of all of us. And if we don't make the honor wall, then we're on the refrigerator because she doesn't have the right kind of picture to frame for the wall. But they regularly, for all three of their children, they regularly go through, now, who is this and who is this? And how is this person related to you? So when they're on a family vacation or when they're with us every other Christmas, they're not afraid. They go, oh, Aunt Kathy. We also FaceTime, and we do our best to be aware and to be present in their lives. And I think that's significant. At the same time, when it's appropriate, we do talk about those who have gone before them. We do talk appropriately about, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and it's significant. Family matters.
Dr. Kathy, family does matter. And I think sometimes as family, we might just highlight the big parts of our story, right? So this is your grandpa, and he was in the war, and this is, a segment of his story. And it's natural to kind of maybe look at that as a highlight or a happening, almost like Instagram or Facebook might, where we kind of just put that up and maybe it's a snapshot on the wall. How do we reframe our family story in ways that really connects with kids and gives them maybe a footing for what I think is a phrase that I probably have heard you say before, so that their todays can also connect and drive their tomorrows?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I'm a big believer in today helping to form tomorrow. Absolutely. So, it is appropriate to talk about the big things, isn't it? The war and all those kinds of things, for sure. How did we make the decisions we made? Why did, grandpa become an engineer? Why did grandma become a music teacher, or whatever the situation might be? What is it in her past that caused her to believe that this would be a good future for her? How did you fall in love? Like, what's the love story? So huge, right? Like when Deb and Dave, when my brother and his wife, they have 3 kids, when those kids found out that Deb and Dave, knew each other from 8th grade, where Dad pulled Debbie's pigtails, in German class. I mean, just crack up when they found out that they were, first chair trumpet, second chair clarinet, and marched in the band together. The love story, the happenings, the sacrifices they made, I think were huge. A real story, Wayne, an actual real story has an introduction. Every story, every TV show, every movie, every story. There's a problem, and there's a climax, there's a solution, and a conclusion. Every story. There's introduction. There's always a problem. Good stories. There's always a problem, always a climax, always a conclusion. So I think maybe as we tell the story of the family, what are some of the problems? What are some of the climaxes? How do those problems affect us and show up? How do we know the solutions, and how do we solve those problems? And how do we live our life now? Because now kids aren't going to be afraid of, oh, wait, there's a problem. Oh, wait, that's normal. Grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, brother, sister, we've all had problems. But you don't live in the problem. You always look for the solution. There's always a climax. It can be tense, but look for the solution.
I really enjoy these conversations that we have with Dr. Kathy. It helps me frame out so much. It's almost similar to what I think happens with Timothy when Paul's writing to him. And so today I want to focus on a passage out of 1 Timothy 1, verse 7. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. This verse comes out of a context. Timothy's really a young leader in an early church, and he ends up facing a lot of fear and opposition as he's leading the church. Paul doesn't just tell him to be brave. He actually reminds him of an amazing spiritual legacy that he has, the sincere faith that Paul says lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. He references that in 2 Timothy 1, verse 5. Timothy's courage came not from himself, but from a lineage of faithful women who shaped him. Paul encouraged him to really fan that flame that was a gift from God by remembering who he was and whose he was. Timothy's strength for ministry didn't begin with him. It was passed down to him. His family formed faith that was a foundation that God built on. I wonder if parents, we really live in this time and place where the noise of now really tries to drown out the truth of the past. Culture urges kids to look inward or online for identity, but it really leaves them unanchored, unattached, and anxious. You have a precious role as somebody who gets to work with kids and love on kids and raise kids, to link your kids to a grander story, to remind them of where they come from, not just biologically, but also spiritually. Let them know their spiritual lineage and teach them God's promises that have held you and your family in the past. And connect them to biblical heroes where there is real people who face real struggles and find hope in a real God. I think that's a bright light that shines and cuts through dark times for our kids and the dark times that our kids will face in the future. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. As a reminder, this podcast is brought to you today by our friends at Creating a Masterpiece. Visit creatingamasterpiece.com for more on that. Well, I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. We're so glad you joined us today, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.